Welcome to the book launch of Strangers in the Land. Exclusion, Belonging, and the Epic Story of the Chinese in America. Written by Michael Luo. Michael is executive editor at The New Yorker and writes regularly for the magazine. He's been there since 2016, and prior to that, he spent 13 years at the New York Times as an investigative journalist. He's the recipient of the George Polk Award and a Livingston Award for Young Journalists. When Michael told me about this book last year, I said to him, this is going to be like the Super Bowl for the Chinese American community. It's not often there's a book that's published on the stories, the historical stories of Chinese in America, but it's even more rare to be published by a major publisher. Places like MOCA should be celebrating this book all year long. So I hope you'll agree. I hope you all think this is a great kickoff event, right?
Yes.
And there's never been a more urgent moment for this book. The Chinese exclusion period highlighted in this book sparked the very debate over birthright citizenship, which will soon be debated again in the Supreme Court. And now in states like Florida and Texas, new alien land laws seek to prohibit Chinese in this country from owning property. The stories in this book reveal how these policies already shaped and affected real lives throughout American history. And there's no better place than the Museum of Chinese in America to celebrate this book launch. In our newest exhibition that opened last week, you can see the rare Qing Dynasty maps that have traveled from the Boston Public Library, including the 1818 blue map. Through these maps, you can see how Chinese connected the people with the land and the spirituality with the stars and heavens before they started to immigrate to the US and around the world. And in our permanent exhibition, with a single step, you can see Michael's stories come to life through the images, artwork, and pieces from the Chinese exclusion era. In the MOCA collection, we have publications by authors and activists that Michael writes about in the book, like Wang Qinfu, the journalist that first coined the term Chinese American in 1883, or the biography of Young Wing, who was the first Chinese in America to graduate from a US university. Yale, for those of you that don't know. I think there's some Yale people in the room. Young Wing even has a school here in Chinatown, and MOCA helps the students there learn who he is each year. Finally, it's so meaningful to have Michael talk about the new book here in the midst of our magazine exhibition, which covers a period of publishing in which Asian Americans were inventing new ways to see and write about themselves. Their efforts paved the way for writers and editors like Michael to lead magazines of record like The New Yorker. And we're so honored to have Michael bring his friend, author Minjin Lee, to moderate the discussion today. Let's give him a round of applause. Minjin received widespread acclaim for Pachinko, a multi-generational saga about Korean immigrants in Japan, which was a finalist for the National Book Award and named one of the best books of the 21st century by the New York Times. Her debut novel, Free Food for Millionaires, also received critical praise for its portrayal of Korean American life. The highest form of praise I can give Minjin is my wife is Korean American, and unfortunately we're not the most voracious readers for leisure, but Pachinko made it to our nightstand, and I saw Grace's bookmark moving, which doesn't happen that often. Let's just say I've seen the cover of that book throughout my house in prominent places for many days. And I knew something was up when her cousin came over and quickly borrowed the book from us. So I knew something was really special about it. Minjin writes an endorsement of Strangers in the Land on the back cover. She writes, and if you guys all pick up a book today, you can see this endorsement right here. And she writes, "This is not the story of a people being hated. This is the moving story of a people's persistence and resistance, how individuals, families, and changing communities looked hard at rejection, endured violence, consumed daily bitterness, and yet sought the higher purposes of humanity and better lives. A definitive biography of the first Asians in America." And so with that, on behalf of the Museum of Chinese in America, it is my honor to introduce author Minjin Lee and author Michael Luo to discuss the launch of Michael's new book, Strangers in the Land, Exclusion, Belonging, and the Epic Story of the Chinese in America.
Thank you, thanks everybody for, especially the people standing. Oh, there we go. Thank you everybody for who is standing particularly. This is awesome.
What's your karaoke song, Michael? Don't
Sing
you
us
want to
a
know?
song, the piano man.
First of all, thank you, Mike, so much for the introduction, and thank you everybody for coming. And Mike, you wrote a book. It's so good.
It's a little longer than I was expecting.
No, it's so good, and he had no time off at the New Yorker.
I'm a model employee.
Actually, we're not model minorities, we're just models. Also, your parents are here.
Yes. Their stories in the book, their photos in the book. My family, my wife's family's here in the audience too.
Winnie's here. Madeline and Vivian, his daughters, are here, and one went to Bronx Science. Goes to Bronx Science. Is that you? It's better than Stuyvesant.
She's in the Hall of Fame at
Yeah.
Bronx, so.
No, I'll fight you. Speaking of fighting, dude, tell me how this story began. 2016. Walk with me.
Okay. Well, I mean, maybe people have heard this story. This was the fall of 2016, October. It was a Sunday after church, and some of us were on the sidewalk on the Upper East Side, and we were kind of deciding where to go to lunch. Actually, some of the folks that were with me are here today.
You can raise your
it's a
hand
group
because
of
you're
friends. And I had my younger daughter in a stroller, and there was a woman who brushed past us who was aggravated that we were in the way, and she just looked like a typical,
Aggravated? I think that's kind of mild.
Yeah,
Okay.
she looked like a typical Upper East Side person, and and then as she was brushing past, she muttered, "Go back to China," and
No, I think there was an F word in there.
that was after. So in the moment, even though it was after church, I did not turn the other cheek. The adrenaline was flowing, and I ran. I abandoned my daughter in the stroller and ran down the street.
That was you.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Dad left you.
Ran down the street to confront her, and in this sort of exchange, we were yelling back and forth. She's like, "Go back to your effing country." And in the moment, I just didn't know. You're trying to think of a retort, and I said, "I was born in this country," just like yelling.
Good one.
Yeah. It was so pathetic. So, and then this was
I would have ripped her a new one.
this was the kind of heyday of Twitter, and so afterwards in the restaurant, I was kind of shaking, and I kind of I was like kind of live tweeting my feelings about it, and I kind of described what happened. I used the hashtag "This is 2016," and it became this kind of viral moment. I should go back and look and see how many millions of retweets and quote tweets there were. But just to give you a sense of how big it was, like Bill de Blasio tweeted back at me, and he said something along the lines of I have to go back. I should go research it, but it was something along the lines like, "Mike, you're welcome in New York anytime." He was trying to demonstrate his bona fides, so anyway, so what happened was I was part of a team of people at the New York Times who wrote about race in America, and I was an editor, and so I didn't write usually, but some folks on the teams. Rachel Swarns, I'm not sure if she's here tonight.
Are you here, Rachel?
And Mark Lacey.
Where's Mark?
I don't know if Mark. Oh, Mark's there. So
This is his fault.
Mark is the managing editor of the New York Times now, and he was the deputy or national editor at the time. And he just encouraged me to write something about this. And the innovative thing, the smart thing that Mark suggested was to write it as an open letter to this woman. And so I wrote this very quickly. Yes, it's there. Are you going to have me read from it?
No, you know what? I just want you to read 6 sentences.
Right.
Because it kind of broke me. And for those of you who haven't read it in all these years, could you share this with us?
So, yeah. Walking home later, a pang of sadness welled up inside me. You had on a nice raincoat. Your iPhone was a 6 Plus. You could have been a fellow parent in one of my daughter's schools. You seemed, well, normal. But you had these feelings in you, and the reality is so do a lot of people in this country right now. Maybe you don't know this, but the insults you hurled at my family get to the heart of the Asian American experience. It's this persistent sense of otherness that a lot of us struggle with every day. And no matter what we do, how successful we are, what friends we make, we don't belong. We're foreign, we're not American.
Thank you. That's 2016.
Yes.
And that piece became insanely viral.
Yeah, so the other big thing that was really amazing was, so we published this and it was highly read. The editors of the New York Times the following day, there's a page 1 meeting where you decide what's on the front page. I was actually at the page 1 meeting as an editor who's kind of pitching stories for the front page, and there was discussion about actually putting that open letter on the front page of the New York Times, and I kind of recuse myself. You know, it's your decision, it's your call.
Did you want that or not?
Well, I didn't even think we were going to publish it actually in the print newspaper. And so, anyways, the thing was, so they made a decision to publish on the front page, which I just think is. We're in a digital first era. Mark is probably like looking at me and he's like, what is he? He's talking about print. But it was a big deal to publish this piece, this open letter, this form on the front page of the newspaper. And there was a week-long conversation that followed, and where we had people send in videos of kind of direct-to-camera videos of their own experiences with this, and so hundreds of people across the country sent in videos and we turned that into a thing, and it became such a big thing that I just remember I was at Barnes and Noble's, and I was with one of my daughters, and somebody said to me, "Are you Michael Luo?" and they had seen that video. And it was like I was an actor, and so so what I say in the book and how I explain how this obviously this was 2016, and so I didn't start working on this book until 2021, but this kind of what happened was, I was suddenly kind of the face of Asian America. I was on all these panels. I was on Morning Joe, I think. I was on TV, and the thing about it,
you're a model.
Yeah. So and the thing about it was actually, I just remember he's not here tonight, I don't think, but Jelani Cobb, who is a historian by training, a staff writer at the New Yorker, became my colleague at the New Yorker because I went to the New Yorker a month or so later. He speaks in these full paragraphs. So it was a panel on race, and I went after Jelani. And Jelani, who's a historian by training, so steeped in the history of the Black experience in America, Civil War.
He's also from Queens.
Yes, and he was just so steeped in his articulation of the Black experience in America from history. And I was just a guy who had this thing happen to me, and I just realized that I actually wasn't, deeply familiar with this history.
What did you major in? I don't actually know.
I was a government concentrator at Harvard, and I actually regret it. I wish I was a history major or history and literature. If I had to do it again, that's what I would do. But anyway, so that was actually the seed of the book. But then it didn't come into fruition until 2021.
But you know, when a racist incident occurs to us, there are many responses, right? And you decided that you're going to write a history book.
Yeah.
It's not that normal. Just saying. And I was just curious because none of us have had, well, actually I read the book, it's really good, I recommend it. But not that many people have had a chance to read it in full, and I really want you to. This book is so good, and I want you to read it in chapters, because each chapter almost functions not just as a historical narrative or just thematically, even though the book is structured in a beautiful way, but it's also really just stories about people. And you got that killer New York Times review today, too. I'm going to quote one sentence. Despite such obstacles, the obstacles being that it's really difficult to find information about Asian Americans, this specifically, Luo, that's him, finds an incredible number of characters. Although he describes a book as, quote, the biography of the people, it succeeds through its little biographies of individuals, a range of quirky and fascinating figures, both Chinese and white, who drive the narrative. And I think that if you can approach this book chapter by chapter, and I think there's 25 chapters?
Maybe 26. I think the epilogue is 26.
Okay,
Yeah.
26.
Yeah.
Well, he wrote it.
I got published it. I just remember I didn't like the lack of symmetry at the end.
OCD. Okay. No, I have it, so that's why I could tell. So, if you look at each of the chapters, you will meet all these unbelievable characters. And throughout tonight, we don't have very much time because I really want to make space for you to ask questions. I have tiny, like 2-paragraph cuttings of the book in which you can hear the voices that Michael was able to pull from all these archives. And I thought that it's so meaningful, especially in this building, to hear the voices of the Chinese. So I hope that when I ask the questions, and I'm going to pass him the book, and he's going to read little sections, like we can actually feel these ghosts around us, who haunt us, and who actually must be resisting the fact that we have had all these beautiful dreams to come to this country, all the betrayals that the Chinese have suffered, and yet the resistance of the Chinese to actually continue and become Americans.
Yeah, I mean, that I love that aspect of the review because that is exactly what I was trying to do, and I think one of the things I bring in the book. Any time, as you said, that there aren't many voices in the way history works is it's the powerful that write history and the powerless who are left out, and so it takes work to look for those voices and look for those characters. Anytime I sensed or saw, like in a newspaper article or a manuscript, an unpublished manuscript, an unpublished memoir, anytime there was a sense of a chance to have a character, a protagonist, I just glommed onto that and tried to build around that. And it was building around characters and scenes.
This one tiny section is going to be one paragraph, but there's one sentence that I wanted you to hear because it really resonates, I think, with our current experience. Maybe you can set this up for us. Here you go. It's right here.
Okay.
It's one paragraph.
Okay. You just want me to read where you
And then you can
pointed the
explain
arrow.
it to us.
Okay. Okay, so they demanded to know, what do you Chinamen mean by working here? You have no business to work here. Leo tried to reason with the men and offered to leave if they were in the wrong place. We Chinamen do not want any trouble, he said, but the white miners set upon them. A half-dozen men surrounded Leo Carcon One miner bashed him in the head with a shovel, leaving a gash on Leo's forehead that cut straight to the bone. Another man attacked Leo Lung Ming, leaving him with deep wounds in the head, chest, and right knee. So I need to explain that now?
Yeah.
So-
Because I want you to remember the lines. We Chinamen don't want any trouble.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, so this is drawn from the chapter about the Rock Springs Massacre, which is one of the most horrific acts of racial terror in American history. It was 28 Chinese miners were killed by white miners, and the New Yorker excerpted this chapter. I'm really proud of the chapter because of it's such a seminal moment in history. And the thing about it is there have been some books written about it, but no one's really kind of told this as a story.
So tell us where Rock Springs is.
So Rock Springs is in Wyoming.
Somebody got points over there. They got it.
Wyoming. It's
Jennifer Aitley just got the answer. You win Jeopardy. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, it's in back then it was a territory. It was the Wyoming Territory, and it was a town really built by the railroad as the railroad was heading across the country at that point west. Actually, these kind of towns would spring up along the way, and the thing that Rock Springs had is coal, and they really needed coal, and so these mines were dug, and it kind of this kind of town grew up, and the Chinese came as workers.
Well, you have these European miners, right?
Yeah.
And then you have these Chinese miners brought
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.
I wonder who's paid less.
Yeah. So
I wonder who worked harder.
Yes. So the deal. This is actually complicated. So this is like the connection of American labor with the Chinese and with Chinese exclusion. There was unrest among the laborers, the white laborers in Rock Springs, and they were upset. They wanted higher wages, and then before the massacre happened, several years before, there was a point when the white miners went on strike, and the company brought in Chinese miners, and then they were the ones who were mostly retained, and only a certain number of white miners were brought back. What happened in this particular moment is, so it's a little bit unclear whether this was an intentional act or kind of
Intentional act by whom?
by these white miners who set upon the Chinese miners. So what happened was there was a room, as they call it, underground, and these white miners came, and what they claimed was that these Chinese miners were in the room that was properly theirs, and so.
And also you get paid for how much coal you get out. So you want to be in a room in which you get the most amount of coal because you get paid more money.
Right.
So you're fighting for what has the most exploitative power.
Right, and so what happened? But the thing about it is, according to the white miners, these Chinese miners were in this place that they were supposed to be. But there are these really eerie clues, including one that I found, where there was this recollection. There was a memoir written by a white miner who remembered the night before, a miner came in and said to his cousin, like, do you have a gun? And he gave him a gun, and he's like, basically the tone of it was, get ready for tomorrow because like we're gonna need you, kind of thing. And so that is kind of this clue that maybe it was actually a premeditated act.
Well, I'm quoting you, and it says, the miners spilled out onto the streets, a cry went up, quote, vengeance on the Chinese.
Yeah.
Where's the ambiguity?
Yeah, no, it's the question is whether it was a pre-planned attack or a...
Vengeance on the Chinese.
Yeah, so that was so after this event where they were set upon and there was this melee, the white miners walked out of the mine, and then they gathered in this kind of union hall, a Knights of Labor hall, and that's where they decided to basically attack the Chinese quarter and burn it down.
Yeah, I was so struck by this. It said the mob took a vote and decided that the Chinese residents would be expelled. A group of 75 armed men began making their way toward Chinatown. When they encountered a group of Chinese workers along the railroad tracks, the rioters fired wildly at them. The mob then halted just outside the Chinese quarter. A committee of 3 men delivered an ultimatum that residents had an hour to pack up their belongings. Barely a half hour had elapsed, however, when rioters invaded Chinatown. I was wondering if you can read just this section here.
Okay.
And then it would end in the next page. It's about a paragraph and a half.
Okay. The violence coursed through town like a river, drawing in men, women, and children. One female resident, whose home was near the plank bridge, pointed a revolver at the terrified Chinese men fleeing past her and fired 3 shots in quick succession, felling 2 of them. This was likely Mrs. Osborne, the owner of a laundry in town, who was later celebrated for killing 2 Chinese men. Another woman who had an infant in her arms but she still managed to knock down a Chinese man running by. When her baby wailed, she spanked him before turning to pummel the Chinese man some more. The rioters began setting fire to the buildings of the Chinese encampment. Dense black smoke billowed over the quarter. Frightened residents dashed outside with blankets covering their heads. The bodies of dead Chinese lay everywhere. Rioters tossed corpses into the burning buildings. The smell of burning flesh was acrid. A gusting wind led to fears that the conflagration would spread to the rest of town. Rioters suspended their torches in the Chinese huts, but more than 40 homes burned to the ground. Miners usually stored the black powder they used in their homes. When the licking flames reached a cache, the sky would flash with a powerful explosion. A group of rioters descended upon a dugout belonging to a laundryman, Ali, who had barricaded himself inside. The members of the mob fired through the window. A single shot rang out from inside the building. He was armed. Attackers broke through the roof, and a brief scuffle followed. Afterward, Ali lay dead on the floor with a gunshot wound to the back of the head. A female rioter stomped on his body. Another looted bundles of laundry he had laid out for delivery. Akun took shelter in a cellar. When he emerged at about 8 o'clock in the evening, several white men spotted him. When the men opened fire, Akun ran. In his panic, he dropped about $1,600 in gold that he had been carrying. He made his way to a railroad section house east of town, where a white resident gave him bread and water and allowed him to rest before he started walking towards Evanston. Several Chinese residents approached the Reverend Timothy Thurloway, who lived near Chinatown with his wife and 2 daughters. In the evenings, the Thurloways taught English to Chinese miners. The frightened Chinese residents asked if they could hide inside their home, but the family advised them that it wouldn't be safe and sent them away. One miner named China Joe, who worked in number 3 mine, hid in a large oven for 3 days before sneaking out in the middle of the night and fleeing to Green River. A Chinese clerk who worked in the company's general store survived by hiding in the cellar for a week.
Wyoming. I believe 28 people were murdered. I believe that.
Yeah, it could be more.
It could be more, that's right. And 15 were injured. I read that 78 Chinese homes were burned down, resulting in property damage about $150,000 then, which would be about $5 million in today's dollars. Now, tell me what the judicial consequences were, because there were witnesses.
Yeah, so the men were arrested, but it was basically kind of a sham, and like they stopped at a bar on the way to jail, and basically no white residents would testify against their fellow neighbors.
But tell us why that's really important, because if you have Chinese testimony at that time, it's inadmissible, right?
That's in California, which passed a law that Chinese testimony was inadmissible. The thing that happened here was actually, it's not a little bit unclear. It's not clear if they actually genuinely tried to get Chinese witnesses. Later, the prosecutor said that somebody was supposed to help them. One of the consuls was supposed to help them get Chinese witnesses, but the consul said that he never heard from anybody, and so it doesn't really look like they made a real effort. And so they were acquitted very quickly. And actually, it was the Thurloways, actually, that I read. They testified that they saw that the Chinese setting fire to the buildings themselves. And this was kind of like a big kind of turning point in the grand jury proceedings. And so basically,
I believe that fire is called gaslighting.
yeah, so they were, so it was acquitted, and they were treated as kind of conquering heroes when they came back to town.
The reason why we're dwelling on this thing that happened in 1885, right? And I would like to connect it with today in terms of, I don't know if you guys know about HB 7, which is a law in Florida. It's called, also known as the Stop Woke Act. And this kind of law is in about 20 different states right now in this country today, in which we are not allowed to teach or discuss things that would make the white majority uncomfortable, in which it might perpetuate the idea that people could be racist inherently. It has recently been challenged. It has gone to the 11th Circuit Court, and the courts have said, the federal courts have said, parts of this are unconstitutional for higher education as well as for certain employers, because it would violate the First Amendment. However, for secondary schools, high school, elementary school, junior high schools, this still applies, and educators have to navigate how do we teach this history that happened in 1885 to today. And I was just curious, something terrible happened to you in front of your family. Everybody in this room at some point has encountered these kinds of stupid remarks. We have eaten our bitterness. You decide to spend all of your free time writing a book because we should know how fucking badass we are. And yet, it may not be able to be shared. And I was curious, like, so you have done the homework. You have created a beautiful work of literature. It should be shared. What do you think?
I mean, actually, the New York Times book review, there's a line that review, and I think he meant it as a compliment. He said he kind of noted my kind of tone in the book, and said it was not written as a anti-woke polemic, and also not sanitizing history. And I take that as a compliment because, and I, even though I kind of quibble a little bit with the idea of an anti-woke polemic, so sometimes journalists who write history are maybe criticized or knocked by historians because they're like, oh, he's not making an argument, he's telling a story. I think Rick Atkinson, great former Washington Post journalist who's just come out with a new book on the American Revolution, he was asked about this recently, and he's like, I like that. It's true, I tell stories. And I think in the book I am trying to tell a story, but the arc of the book, the thing about it is, I'm not the first person to have written this, a Chinese American history. The most comparable book that comes to mind is Iris Chang wrote the book, The Chinese in America, which published around 2000, 2001. Extraordinary book. I had actually never read it before I started on this, before I wrote it.
I heard Nanjing Massacre book is also brilliant.
It's incredible. And so I actually, as an aside, I encourage folks to read it, and I was a little puzzled why it wasn't more widely read. In one, it could be because soon after she wrote the book, she committed suicide. It's like this incredible tragic story. It's a little bit of a mystery, and some people speculate that all the kind of stuff, the ugly stuff that she was immersed in writing about, from the Nanjing Massacre to the experience of the Chinese American, might have kind of been too much. But Iris Chang's book is much more of like a kind of larger overview of the Chinese in America. I tried to write this as, my elevator pitch of the book was it's a narrative history of Chinese exclusion. And I was trying to understand what happens when all these people from a distant land who look different, have a different religion, arrive on American shores. And this, what happened on the West Coast in the 19th century was this kind of almost unprecedented, up to that point, experiment in multiracial democracy. It had people from Black Americans, indigenous people, Californios, they were the Mexican residents who became American citizens after annexation. And I wanted to understand, you know, how it was that, you know, a country could do this to a people and kind of conclude together that we're going to exclude these people and kind of oppress these people. And, you know, like the thing about it is, the question is, the answer is like, is it race? Is it economics? Is it religion? Is it, you know, human nature? The thing about it is, I think it's all of these things, and that's why these kinds of bills are kind of silly.
Well, they are silly, and yet they're incredibly popular. Over 20 states are trying to pass them, and they are targeting things that are true. You have almost 500 footnotes in this book. Like, if this book looks thick.
It looks very thick because there's 40,000 words of endnotes.
Right, the endnotes are just so
160,000 words and 40,000 words of endnotes.
Right.
Just keep that in mind. So there's like a really fat part of it that's.
And the chapters are really short, so I really do think that if you approach it, there's really a depth at a time. It flies. And also, there's so much that you don't know in that level of detail. I did actually study Asian American history when I was in college, and I knew about these things, but I thought that you had done so much great archival research, which made it so much more interesting and fun to read. I want to ask you what you think about this, and I know we have to open it for questions, and I really want to hear from you. You guys are standing. Standing questions get priority.
I will say on the readability thing that, and maybe I'll embarrass my dad who's here. The first person who read the entire book was my dad. And one day, because we were at, we go to my parents' house every summer. They live out near Princeton, and my book existed at that point in these printouts. And so I was working on, and there's just a pile of printouts. And one day he just took the first chapter of the printout and just started reading it. And then he read the next one, and he read the next one, and then he finished the whole book. And he's not, English is not his first language.
And he got a PhD.
He is a pioneer.
That was a little bit,
He is a pioneer.
That was a little sketch there, Mike.
He is a pioneer, but he read the whole book, and that was the first time I knew that I had done something, that I had done something right in the way I wrote the book and structured it.
See, the filial roots are so strong. Well, I'm proud of you too, Mike. So, this is something that Asian Americans say about our history. They often say that it's a sad history, and they don't want to be sad, they don't want to be depressed. And it's interesting that you were saying all these things because, you know, do kids want to hear about the Rock Springs Massacre? Do they want to hear about the Los Angeles lynchings? The largest mass lynchings in America happened to the Chinese. I was recently at the legacy sites in Alabama, and there were actually some mention of this. However, I think when we think of lynchings, we think about the terrible persecution that enslaved people and post-Jim Crow blacks in this country have suffered. But the mass lynching in Los Angeles is insane, and the chapter in this is amazing. However, it's not just sad. It's not just about being hated. For me, I thought this was incredible because there were so many things that the Chinese have done to endure it and yet become empowered. So can we talk a little bit about Wong Kim Ark? Because this law that basically a huigong, am I saying that right?
What?
Is this like family association, is it huigong?
Oh yeah, Huigong. Yeah.
Wait, thank you.
Yes.
My Chinese is not so
Yeah.
good. Huigong actually supported this
Yeah.
lawsuit,
Yeah.
and this law affects everybody,
Yeah.
not just the Chinese. So can you tell us about it?
Yeah, so it's the birthright citizenship, the constitutional precedent of. In the 14th Amendment, it says that you're born. I can't quote it exactly. Born in the United States of America and subject to the jurisdiction there, you're a citizen. And this was part of the 14th Amendment. It was actually it was another case called Lukten Ali. It was like a teenage boy.
Tell us about this little boy. He's born in America.
Right.
Kind of like Melania's child.
Yeah.
He's born in America.
Well, so there was another case of a Chinese boy that came before this. This one went all the way to Supreme Court. Wonka Mark, I am proud of just the way you're able to kind of tweeze together a narrative of a life from just these scattered immigration documents that have aspects of his story in it. And he was born in 1870. His dad was a merchant. They lived upstairs from their store that they had, and he was born up above that store. He went back to China a few times. He got married in China. Before he went back the last time, before this the test case that came about, he made sure to get some affidavits from people who remembered.
He had his papers together.
Yeah, so that to attest that that he was a natural-born American. And so what happened was there was great interest at the time among certain people to test this principle of birthright citizenship. There was a guy named George Collins. He sounds like a little bit of a kook, but actually he was a very shrewd legal scholar who started writing these articles in legal reviews that made the case that this clause that if you're born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, you're an American citizen. He was trying to argue that Chinese, even if they were born in America, were not subject to the jurisdiction thereof. They were subjects of because their parents were Chinese subjects. And so he tried to make this case. There was some discussion, I think, at the time the immigration was enforced by these customs inspectors, and there was discussion in coordination with the Attorney General of the United States at the time, who agreed that they wanted to establish a test case for this. So it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and
It's the law today. It's the law.
Yeah, and the really interesting part of the decision, the justification for the decision, one of the things that was really of concern was there were millions of white Americans, natural-born white Americans, European immigrants, descendants of European immigrants, who would be threatened if this was not upheld, and that was beyond the pale. Like that's part of the decision if you read that. Yeah. And so, anyways, and then the final thing I'll say about Wonka Mark, which is amazing, and I didn't know this part, is this didn't end his trouble with immigration. Like after a few years after he was the subject of one of the most famous Supreme Court decisions, today, he was actually working in El Paso, Texas, and he had crossed the border from Mexico, and there was a Chinese inspector down there who was really zealous, and there was real worry about people violating the exclusion law passing the border, and they arrested Wonka Mark. They knew actually that he was the subject of this famous case, but yet they detained him for I think a week or so. They made him pay this $300 bond, and then even after that, his sons who were American citizens, because the children of American citizens, even if they're born abroad, are American citizens. They were hassled, detained on Angel Island when they tried to come back in. One of them was sent back to China, was not able to enter the country. So it's a pretty incredible saga, and then he eventually returned to China and died in China.
So I really want to talk about this one word that comes up in Michael's book, and it's this word precarity. You wrote, in examining the history of the Chinese in America, I've come to realize the precarity of the Asian American experience has never fully subsided. Throughout American history, we have been told to go back to where we came from. This precarity, and I was just wondering, after having written this incredible tome, you've done all the research, you've told the stories, you've made it relatable to students, all of us, right? And where do you think this precarity lies for you now? Do you feel personally stronger? Do you feel like that act has transformed you? Do you feel like if you read this book, you're going to feel like, oh, I know when to fight, I know when not to fight?
Well, I think precarity is a good way to think about it, because I think multiple things can be true about the Asian American experience. Because the post-1965 immigration wave was prioritized people with skills, people like my parents who came for graduate school. There are a lot of Asian Americans, Chinese Americans who are highly educated and professional and have enjoyed enormous success. That obscures other aspects of the Asian American experience, the fact that the greatest income inequality, Asian Americans have a greatest level of income inequality than any other
and in New
ethnic
York
or
City,
racial.
1 out of 4 Asian Americans, our brothers and sisters, live in poverty.
Yeah,
In our city.
exactly. And the thing that I think precarity is a really useful word, because it just helps you understand. This book came out of I started working on it after the Atlanta spa attacks in the spring of 2021. I signed a contract for the book in the summer of 2021, and it came out of that moment. People, I probably all still really viscerally remember that moment of what it was like to walk on the street as an Asian American, that kind of fear that you had. And that moment has subsided. It's not exactly clear where we are right now. That visceral fear has definitely subsided.
You feel that it's subsided?
I think it. I mean, that. I remember, like, when I went to play. I go play tennis. I see a friend of mine here, Dino, who's I play tennis with at 9 o'clock at night on the Upper East Side, and we play from 9 to 11 p.m. And during that period, I wasn't sure if it was safe to go home, and I texted my wife before I left the tennis bubble, just so and I don't do that anymore. That's what I mean. The thing that but what is going on right now is there's kind of this bipartisan bellicosity about the threat posed by communist China, and my family fled communist China, went to Taiwan when the communists came. My grandfather on my father's side was a Kuomintang general who was killed by the communists, disappeared. To a certain degree, I understand some of the worry about the Chinese threat. They're a military economic juggernaut. But every single
1.3 billion Chinese.
But every time that you hear this kind of Democrat, Republican lawmakers just railing about communist China, that just kind of adds to the tinder of racial suspicion, and I feel that. And so the precarity is just a good word, because you might feel comfortable. You might feel like this bigotry and violence of the 19th century doesn't apply to you any longer. But that sense of belonging, that I was. What I wrote in that open letter was, I wondered whether my kids, who are born in the U.S. Don't speak Chinese particularly well, sadly. They're working on it. Are
You just totally embarrassed me.
two generations.
I protest.
two generations removed from my parents' immigrant experience, if they would ever feel like they belonged. that was the thing that I wrote about in that letter, and that is the question I think that still persists today for Asian Americans.
You know, I think this is such an incredibly important point, and as for belonging, I think part of it is that we have to insist that we belong, and we have to take up space. And speaking of space, do you have any questions for Mike? Because he knows everything. And you've been standing, sweetie. You have the white sweatshirt.
This is Edna, one of my daughter's friends. So she's going to ask a question. That's great.
What did you feel when you were writing the book?
What did I feel when I was writing the book?
I'll be tired, but
well, I mean, so I think that for the writers in the room, I'm a big believer in outlining and chunking out the book, and if you have done a good job planning what you're going to write, the writing can come fairly fast. I don't know if that helps. Who's famously spent a very long time writing her novels. Maybe we should actually tell people some news. You have your third book. You have what? Just turned it in?
No. I'm working on it, Mike.
I thought I was going to break some news.
No, it is going to probably come out in the end of 26, but it is not about me, it is about you.
Yeah. Anyways, I guess what I would say is like when if you have carefully planned out what you're going to write, it will flow out of you.
But if it doesn't, just stay with it. And be gentle with yourself. Mark, do you have a question?
I'm good.
Yes, hi. What's your name?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
First name is Edward.
How are you?
I'm good.
Welcome. You have a question for Mike?
I do. For your book, research, did you research on how the white American feel about belonging as a citizen? Have they ever even used that as a question?
It's a good question. I mean, so the Chinese came around the same time as the Irish, and the Irish were There's a famous book, How the Irish Became White. I highly recommend it. And I mean, the big difference. So they were a persecuted group. Experienced all kinds of ugliness because they were Catholic, and so there was a lot of ugliness that the Irish experienced. The thing that was the difference between the Chinese and the Irish is they were able to become citizens. They were able to become naturalized citizens, and the Chinese were not, and the Irish were able to accumulate real political power, and so that was a big difference, and so the Irish experience and the Chinese experience diverged within a generation.
But to continue with Edward's question in relationship to your book, you are very explicit about how the Irish persecuted the Chinese. So I'm always wondering, is the process of becoming American a process of oppressing the new people?
Yeah.
What's interesting is that why are the Chinese new forever?
Yeah, I mean, there was. Maybe this isn't exactly what you're asking, but there is a really actually complicated tension with Chinese and Black Americans. There was like this kind of, and just like there is today.
Are you talking about the Mississippi events, or?
Well, no, I mean, they actually that's a fascinating history. It's in Ryan Coogler's new movie how there were Chinese grocers in the Jim Crow South in Mississippi, and they served Black customers, and they kind of occupied this. They saw this kind of unique business opportunity. The thing that was going on on the West Coast with was there was this kind of competition of like black Americans who were like, oh, but they're heathens, you know, and so, but we are Christians, and so there was, and there was, and it went the other way too. There is,
And also Frederick Douglass.
yeah. Well, anyway, so there's just competition among groups that are experiencing, not the dominant group. Frederick Douglass is an incredible American, and just kind of
He's
a
awesome.
yeah. I mean, so he wrote what you're referring to. There's a passage in the book about this. He defended the Chinese with his newspaper in New York early on when the California governor was passing laws against the Chinese, and then he started to give he was kind of a itinerant speaker. He would give speeches, and he gave this speech called composite nationality. That's what it was called, and he was talking about how America could be this model for the world because we had this composite nationality of all these different hues. In his own sort of language, it's in some ways sort of awkward and cringy when you read it now, but he celebrated the diversity of America and said yes, the Chinese should come, and make them citizens. They should vote and they should live among us, and we will be this kind of multi-hued composite nation.
No,
It's beautiful.
Well, I mean, it sort of is the precursor for the Rainbow Coalition, right?
Yeah.
That sort of idea. Yes, sir. Your name is?
My name's Rocky.
Hey, how are you?
Thank you for writing this book. And I guess my question is, some of us attended the Promontory Summit
Hang on.
celebration
Yeah.
a couple of years ago.
Yeah, you should explain what that is to.
Well, it was the
Yes.
150th anniversary. That time, the Chinese were welcomed. The 100th, they were not.
Right.
There's a story behind that.
Yeah.
But my question actually is, did you? I haven't read the book, so I'm not.
Yeah.
Maybe you could comment a little bit more about, since we're in the midst of this Wonka Mark revisiting, the climate back then, in terms of the politics. There was another program that the Tenement Museum did with Hunter on birthright citizenship, where May Nai and Harold Holzer, I think, and other people talked about the politics of the time. I don't know if that's something you looked at.
Yeah, totally.
You mentioned, did you also about Frederick Douglass? So I think
Yeah.
there is. I'm an attorney, so there is some views now about how we look at the 14th Amendment in terms of the importance of black citizenship for males.
Well, maybe this isn't exactly what you're had in mind. The thing that comes to mind when you talk about the politics is, because like one of the questions is, the Chinese immigration was largely a problem, an issue for the West Coast, and so how was it that in 1882 they passed this Chinese restriction law, and in subsequent years kept kind of tightening that law, and that's the law that we know as today as the Chinese exclusion law. How did that come about when it was mostly kind of a West Coast issue? Folks here know that New York City Chinatown really started to take root like 1870, 1880-ish, and it was still small relative to the immigration on the West Coast. And the big thing was the fact that the country was so closely divided between Republicans and Democrats. It was like today, just incredibly close. And so the Pacific Coast, California, Nevada, Washington became this political prize that would kind of break this deadlock. And so both Republicans and Democrats. So Democrats were rooted in the post-Reconstruction South, and that was their stronghold. Republicans, this is the party of Lincoln that set enslaved black Americans free. How did they kind of reject all these principles of liberty and equality and all that kind of stuff? It was for political advantage, and so both parties at that point were kind of united in kind of courting, the kind of anti-Chinese, anti-immigrant segment in California, and that was a huge part of what enabled the Chinese exclusion law to become a national issue. And it's just interesting to me today because obviously we're just incredibly closely divided country politically, and immigration and scapegoating of immigrants is another place now where, honestly, both parties to a certain extent are looking for advantage.
Just one more question. Yes, hi.
Hi,
Your name is?
my name is Nancy Waples, and I am the first person of color.
Hang on, one second.
Thank you.
So Nancy's right here. You have a question?
Yeah, my name is Nancy Waples. I'm the first person of color to serve on the Vermont Supreme Court. I am Chinese American. English is a learned language. I am sitting here with Marilyn Brown, the first Asian American woman to serve on the federal bench. And my question is, having been a longtime admirer of yours, and also you, I read literally 3,000 pages a month. And as an appellate judge, and your book gave me great solace, having the chance to read that when I was going through briefs. But I wanted to ask you a question, because one of the things that's the overarching theme here is the discrimination, the stigmatism against Asian Americans, Chinese Americans. But what I found in teaching a course of Asian Americans and the Constitution as a justice to law schools is the resilience of Chinese Americans, Asian Americans, who will challenge the US Constitution, state constitutions at every turn, in comparison to many other minority groups. So how in your research, Michael, do you explain that? And then just one more shout out. My sister Eileen Jair is the development director at MOCA.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Yeah. I mean, the thing about when you I'm going to go back to the writing. So when you're a writer, there is a kind of a little bit of a trope, but it's honestly works. You think of like a 3-act structure of a central protagonist who encounters challenges, and there's kind of complications, and there's kind of like rising kind of tension, and then there's this kind of climactic sort of moment, and then the tension sort of falls off. The Chinese American experience is like that. So they arrive. Initially, they were welcome to a certain extent, and then there are these things that start to happen. There was the railroad, but then there was even then, after the railroad, there were anti-Chinese groups that were starting in San Francisco. Then there's just kind of like this, then there was an economic depression, and then there was this kind of driving out period, which is kind of the emotional heart of the book, when dozens of communities in the American West expelled the Chinese, and they were seeking to drive them out, like fling them from the land. And the thing about it is they didn't succeed, and so the Chinese persisted. The Chinese population in America kind of declined at that point, but then it started to grow again in the 1920s, 1930s, so there is this sort of, I say that it's a history, but it's a biography of a people, and the central character of the book is the Chinese people. And it really is a story of triumph and resilience, and not just in a kind of cliche sort of way. I mean, it's just extraordinary story. And actually, Min, in her little endorsement of her in the book, she caught that and she articulated that, and I was so moved when you wrote your endorsement and noticed that. So you're totally right. And then Wong Kim Ark is a good example. It was maybe it was an accident of history, but he was backed by these Chinese 6 companies who financed this challenge, and there are multiple, as you know, having taught this, multiple cases that went to the Supreme Court that were financed by the Chinese company. There were these white lawyers that fought repeatedly in front of the Supreme Court. Sometimes they lost and sometimes they won. But yeah, they were protagonists in the story of America.
We have had such an amazing evening, and it is amazing because you joined us. And also because the process of belonging, it's not a static moment. It is a growing moment. It is an evolution, and you're part of it. And I want to thank you for your resistance, because you didn't take that shit.
Further instructions, if everybody could stay seated. So Minjin and Michael don't get to see each other that often, so they really wanted a photo out in the front. So we are gonna let them walk out of this room without touching them, let them walk out of this room, and then they're gonna go out and take a photo first. After that, since we're a very packed room, we'll let the people that have been graciously standing in the hallway out first, and then we'll start from the front because Michael's family's here. There's MOCA trustees here, my bosses are here. So we'll do it like a wedding where the front will go out first, and then we'll all exit the room. I apologize to the folks in the back. But again, don't move after you give the big round of applause. But one more time, Midget Lee. And with that, we'll let them out of the room first. Hallway people, don't move yet. Let them